Sonnet 130, "My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun," is without question one of my students' favorite sonnets, and it is a sort of genius sonnet. It is moving on so many different levels, like it's surprising us in so many different ways. It's based on the idea of a blason. A blason. A blason is sort of a itemized list of your lover's qualities. You know, so you, to quote another Shakespeare play, you're writing an ode to your mistress's eyebrow, right? Where you talk about every little part of her. It's kind of a medieval form that Shakespeare's kind of riffing on here. So he is going to list all the different parts of his mistress's body that he admires. And sometimes her demeanor, like the way she walks and things like that. But he's going to do it in a funny way where he seems to be insulting her the whole time. So the tone of the sonnet is different than like some of the other achingly sincere, although posy, sonnets that Shakespeare wrote. So Shakespeare is going to be funny in this sonnet. He's very good at being funny, actually. And he's also like doing a little satire and critique of people who write bad sonnets. Because after Petrarch, it was like you weren't really a man unless you had a couple of sonnets that you'd written for your lady love. And every lady love kind of expected the sonnets, which meant a lot of people were writing sonnets very badly and using a lot of cliches. And there were several that were just like common stock, and they made all the poems sound the same. And so Shakespeare is kind of writing an opposite sonnet where he kind of attacks every single one of those stereotypes. So let's look at some of the stereotypes. If you were writing a cliche sonnet about your lover, your beloved, or your mistress, you would say that her eyes are like the sun, they blind me with her beauty. Her lips are red as coral. Her skin is white as snow, which was one of the values of Shakespeare's time. You would describe her hair as golden wires. Now, that always makes them sound a little cyborg-like to me, but in Shakespeare's day, wires were very rare, right? Like to have these metal, long, thin things. So they were very precious and kind of cool to them. He didn't live in a technological age. So their hair would be golden wires. There would be roses in her cheeks. Her breath would be perfume. Her voice would be music, and she would walk like a goddess. Those were all the sort of cliches about mistresses. So Shakespeare just comes out with flat-out declaration, right? My mistress's eyes, it starts grand. My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. Like he immediately contrasted out the gate. And it's kind of surprising. It's kind of fun to imagine Shakespeare's mistress, who's often known as the dark lady in the sonnets, because her eyes are not like the sun, and she has dark skin and dark hair, and she is kind of the opposite of all the stereotypes. That's one of the reasons we call her the dark lady. It's fun to imagine her reading the sonnet and being taken aback by it. They're like, excuse me? My eyes are not like the sun? But Shakespeare's sort of setting her up for a fall or a joke in some ways. At the same time that he's making fun of bad sonneteers. So again, genius is efficient, and it's doing two things at once. It's insulting his lady, making us laugh at that, insulting bad sonnet writers, making us laugh at that. And you'll see at the end that with the volta, always an important part of the sonnet, he's actually writing a very romantic and charming love poem. Another thing that's really interesting about this sonnet that's built all on similes, you know, everything is, her eyes are like the sun, is that the structure is kind of interesting. Usually we divide these up into quatrains, but really it's really just kind of like a checklist. You kind of just go through the list for the most part, and nothing really happens until right here where we see the word "and yet," which always marks to us like, oh, that's the twist, that's the turn, that's the volta that's happening there. Now, a list would be very boring, truthfully, if Shakespeare was like, my mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. Her lips are not red as coral. Her skin is not white as snow. Her hair is not made of golden wires. Like, that would be boring, but Shakespeare, typical of him, is always like bouncing back and forth, moving the directions, changing the approach to the topic at the same time that he is doing the list. And let's see if we can look at that. It's mostly a poem of negation, right? Just this is not this. My mistress's eyes are nothing like the sun. Coral is far more red than her lips red. If snow be white, why then her breasts are dun. If hair be wires, black wires grow on her head. So you see how he opens with the declaration, but then he begins with the coral and then talks about her lips. And then he sort of like presents a hypothetical. If snow is white, why then her breasts are dun. Now we could talk about the diction here as well. Dun is kind of the color of a brown cow, so it's not a very flattering color. And the reason darker skin was considered not as cool is because it meant that you were not nobility, right? Like you didn't just hang out in a castle all day and have people serve you. Brown skin was a result of working in the fields, more peasant-like, I suppose. So when he says her breasts are done, it's kind of insulting. He does two ifs, right? If snow be white, why then her breasts are done. If hair be wires, black wires grow on her head. I always love this next move. It's kind of like he gets circumspect and he says, you know, I have seen roses damasked red and white, but no such roses see I in her cheeks. You know, he sort of just presents that I've seen roses, but I don't see roses in her cheeks. And in some perfumes is there more delight than in the breath that from my mistress reeks. Oh, the word reeks. What a great word, right? It's an absolutely negative connotation. There's no way that you can make it a good word. You can't go into a house where chocolate chip cookies have just been baked and say, this house just reeks of chocolate chip cookies. No, reeks is, in some ways, the most powerful word in the poem. It's the most negative word and the most insulting word. I totally imagine the dark lady being like, excuse me, my breath reeks? I've got the hot breath? Shakespeare then talks about two more things, the way she speaks and how she walks. I love to hear her speak. Yet well I know that music hath a far more pleasing sound. I grant, I never saw a goddess go. My mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground. So she doesn't walk like a goddess, and her voice is not music. All this is like a long negation and insult. But after he's done all that, we have the twist, the turn, the joke. And yet, by heaven would be a way of like swearing. And yet, by heaven, I think my love as rare. Rare means unique, one of a kind. I think my love as rare as any woman, belied with faults compare. We see that this is kind of the clue to the whole sonnet, is that lots of other sonneteers are just saying stuff about their mistress. And they're not even describing her accurately. They're just using cliches, and they're not being creative. Shakespeare says, my love is unique. She is not like all the other mistresses out there. And that's what makes her special. She doesn't fit the stereotypes of beauty in Shakespeare's day, and that's kind of why he loves her. I often joke to my students that, I always say sonnets are basically pop songs, and so when Shakespeare sees his beloved's face, there's not a thing that he would change because, girl, she's amazing, just the way she is. I mean, that's Bruno Mars, but it's exactly the same meaning of this sonnet, is that my mistress is different and unique and one of a kind, and that's what I like best about her. And notice there are clues in the poem that do this all the time, right? He says that some perfumes have more delight. Doesn't say all. And then what about this? I love to hear her speak. He says that he likes her being real and physical and not a goddess. Who wants to date a goddess? Usually when mortals and gods mixed, it doesn't go well for the mortal. He would rather have a lady who walks on the ground. He enjoys the fact that she is unique and different. And this is sometimes why we call Shakespeare the poet of true love, because he likes to show us fake love and then take us to true love. All the other sonneteers are writing fake love, but he is being like down to earth. We often think of Shakespeare way up here, but he's like, I'm being honest about how I feel about her. So this poem is so much fun. I said that the most important word in the poem for me is reeks, just because it's such a funny word. There's just no way around that comedy. It's funnier because it rhymes with cheeks and falls on the ends of the lines. What is this poem? I said it was doing three different things. It was making fun of bad sonneteers. It was amusing his mistress and making her laugh, which is always a good way to get a girl, right? The guy who gets the girl to laugh is usually the guy who gets the girl. And it's also like flattering her, right, as being one of a kind and unique, and that's what he likes about her best. It begins with insulting declaration, and it ends with absolute adoration, and it makes it one of Shakespeare's best.